When she arrived, everything was normal. The automatic doors slid open with a familiar sigh, and the smell of disinfectant met her immediately. Not unpleasant, just clean. Sharp in the way hospitals always are. The waiting room lights were bright but not harsh. Chairs lined the walls in careful rows, vinyl seats reflecting the overhead glow. A television murmured quietly in the corner, volume too low to follow, but loud enough to remind anyone listening that time was still moving. Behind the desk, a nurse smiled and asked her name. She gave it. There were questions: insurance, date of birth, reason for the visit, routine things, asked 1,000 times a day. The printer hummed. Papers slid across the counter. A clipboard was handed to her. "Someone will call you," the nurse said. She thanked her and took a seat. Everything sounded the way it always does in a hospital. Keyboards tapping softly, footsteps passing somewhere down the hall. A distant cart rolling across tile. She filled out the forms carefully, checking boxes, signing where indicated. When she finished, she placed the clipboard on her lap and waited. Waiting rooms are strange places. You don't belong to them exactly. You're only meant to exist there temporarily, between one place and the next. No one settles in. No one gets comfortable. Time stretches, but never breaks. She glanced at the clock mounted above the desk. It was moving. That was good. She leaned back in her chair and let her eyes wander. The nurse was gone now, replaced by an empty desk. She hadn't noticed when that happened, but it didn't strike her as odd. Staff move constantly. They disappear and return without warning. The television continued its quiet murmur. She listened without listening. Minutes passed, maybe more. The clipboard felt heavier on her lap than it should have. She shifted in her seat, the vinyl creaking softly beneath her. The sound echoed a little more than expected, traveling farther than it should have in a room this size. She looked around. The waiting room was empty. No one else sat in the chairs. No coughing. No shifting feet. No whispered conversations. Just her. She frowned slightly, then relaxed. Hospitals empty out sometimes. Late hours. Slow nights. She checked the clock again. Still moving. She glanced back at the desk, expecting to see someone return at any moment. No one did. The longer she sat, the quieter the room seemed to become. Not silent. Just thinned. The hum of the lights softened, blending into the background until she couldn't quite tell if it was still there or not. The television continued, but the sound felt distant, as if it were coming from another room entirely. She became aware of her own breathing. Slow. Even. She crossed her legs, then uncrossed them. The air felt cool against her skin, but steady. Normal. She told herself that more than once. Eventually, she stood. Her footsteps sounded too loud on the tile, echoing back at her from the walls. She approached the desk and waited, hands resting lightly on the counter. No one came. She leaned forward slightly, peering down the hallway behind the desk. Lights were on, doors closed, nothing moved. She cleared her throat, the sound strangely absorbed by the room. "Hello?" she called softly. The word disappeared almost immediately. She waited, listening for an answer. None came. After a moment, she stepped back from the desk and returned to her seat. She didn't know why she didn't leave. She thought about it. The doors were right there, but she had checked in. That felt important. She sat again, folding her hands in her lap, and waited. Time behaved oddly after that. Not wrong, just less useful. She wasn't bored. She wasn't anxious. She simply existed, suspended in the act of waiting. The clock continued to tick. She stared at it for a long time, watching the second hand sweep around the face again and again. Eventually, she noticed something else. The chairs across from her were angled slightly inward. She hadn't seen them move. She was sure of that. She told herself it was nothing, that chairs get nudged. That perspective shifts when you sit too long. Still, she adjusted her own chair, aligning it carefully with the others. The room felt balanced again. She exhaled and closed her eyes briefly. The sound of the doors opening startled her. Not because it was loud, but because it was sudden. The familiar sigh of the automatic doors filled the room. She opened her eyes. Someone had entered. They walked in calmly, as if arriving exactly where they expected to be. They didn't look around. They didn't hesitate. They crossed the waiting room and sat down several chairs away from her. They didn't speak. They didn't look at the desk. They didn't check in. They simply waited. She watched them from the corner of her eye, heart beating just a little faster now. She told herself not to stare. People come and go. Maybe they had already checked in earlier. Maybe they'd stepped out. Still. She realized something then. They were sitting in the same position she was. Hands folded, feet flat on the floor, eyes forward, waiting. The room felt different with them there, not fuller, just settled, as if the space had completed something. She tried to focus on the television again, but the sound seemed quieter now, almost decorative. She glanced toward the desk, still empty. She looked back at the other person. They hadn't moved. After a while, she noticed something else. They never glanced at the clock. Not once. She shifted in her seat. They did not. She considered speaking. The thought rose and fell without forming words. Instead, she waited. Because that was what the room was for. The other person turned toward her slowly. Their expression was neutral. Calm. "Have you been here long?" they asked. Their voice was soft. She hesitated, then answered, "I'm not sure." They nodded, as if that made sense. "What are you waiting for?" they asked. She opened her mouth, then paused. The answer felt farther away than it should have. "I checked in," she said finally. They smiled faintly. "So did I," they said. She realized then that she hadn't heard them arrive. Not really. The doors had opened, but she hadn't heard footsteps. She hadn't heard them sit. The room had simply accepted them. She looked at the desk again, the clock, the hallway. Nothing changed. She felt tired suddenly, not sleepy, just ready to stay. The doors opened again. Another person entered. They moved the same way. Calm, certain. They took a seat. The waiting room felt complete now. No one spoke. No one checked in. No one was called. The lights hummed softly, steady and patient. She adjusted her posture, aligning herself with the others. Waiting. If you're listening to this now, somewhere quiet, somewhere familiar, let yourself rest. Waiting rooms are meant for stillness, for pause, for moments between moments. There is no rush, no need to move, no need to ask questions. Someone will call your name. Eventually. Until then, just sit. The room knows how to wait. And now, so do you.